Hello everyone, welcome to Bound. Today, as you can see, we are here with Jonathan Pageau. We are chilling at Sean's house, and we're going to be talking about universal history, theology, symbolism, all that good stuff. But before we begin, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So I think, Allheart, you had a question that you wanted to open up with about Canadian universal history.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, Jonathan, first about, I think we're pretty good distance here. I want to ask you first about the place of the French in universal history. We were talking to Sarah from Hamilton a few months ago, and he really likes, the French over like the Germans in terms of, I get the birds are speaking here. I speak the language of the birds. I'm like a Germanic folk hero here. But Seraphim really likes, he thinks the French are kind of, he really likes the French, even with all the kind of post-structuralist theory, which we know, you can turn on its head, it's not all bad, but even with all that kind of stuff, he still thinks the Germans have more kind of baggage to them with regards to kind of biblical criticism and whatever. So how do you see the place, first of all, of the French in universal history? Obviously, it's going to be significant because you have Charlemagne and whatnot. And then also from there, what do you think of the place of the Quebecois in universal history? Because there is a difference there. I mean, it was a refrain and a point of pride for the Quebecois before the the silent revolution that, hey, we were the French that didn't kill our king.
That's right. That's right.
So what do you think of that?
I definitely do think that the French, for sure, Charlemagne is very important in the development of Christianity, because in some ways it's very interesting. Even in terms of iconography, it's interesting to think about Charlemagne, because he's at the moment of the ecumenical council, and the West never had iconoclasm, right? They didn't go against icons. So the image of Charlemagne, and we always forget, this is something that people don't. Charlemagne was never the emperor of the West. That idea is wrong. Charlemagne was the emperor. Stop. He was just he was named after Irene's dead husband, because Irene blinded her son and killed her son. And so basically the Pope was like, this is crazy. We can't have this lady say she's an emperor. And so we need to find a new emperor. And then Charlemagne, in the way he's crowned as a continuation of the Byzantine emperor. So Charlemagne is the continuation of the Byzantine Empire, interestingly enough. So obviously there's a duality that sets itself up. You can almost see that it's the place where the duality starts to show itself, almost secretly at the outset, this kind of division between East and West. Although there are some interesting legends about how he even proposed, there was an idea that he could propose to Irene, and they could have like a wet. Can you imagine what that would have been like? Anyways, so I think that that's the kind of the way to understand it. That the West becomes in some ways a kind of bulwark, like a kind of defense, and it's a defense that's very strong, but at the same time it starts to move away already at the same time. So that's the way that I tend to understand France and the West, and so the story of how France is involved in the degeneracy of the papacy, by influence from the king, and the idea that now we name the Pope, and there's 2 popes and 3 popes. And even the fact that the French king kills the Templars, all that becomes like an important part of the history of how the West and its secular tendency starts to take up more and more space in the history. And so I think that's probably the way to understand it. And so, but the thing about France that's interesting, or the French that's interesting, is that there's still always a kind of undercurrent that remains. So, although you kind of see it move towards secularism and the revolution, like if you were gonna find a anti-revolutionary narrative, right, you would choose de Maistre, you would choose a French writer, because they're the ones who ended up having. So like the influence in my life, it's like in the secularization and the kind of evacuation of meaning. René Guénon, who's a French writer, appears as the one who also formulates one of the best answers to that question. And so I think that is something that we should keep an eye out in terms of what the role that France will play, like in how everything plays out, is that we see them as a revolutionary kind of ultimately like a kind of anti-traditional or anti-Christian force, but there's always this surprising undercurrent that reappears and can be a little bright moment. Now, as for the Québécois, I think it's very fascinating to think about. The Québécois have a very powerful universal history in the sense of that Quebec's foundation and its story is full of miracles and of like holy people. Like even Samuel de Champlain was known as a very pious person, who really attributed the success of the colony to prayer, and he was close to the native population, and so there are some really powerful stories, and even the French martyrs who came and died at the hands of different tribes and everything. These beautiful, powerful testimonies, and they've been completely cast aside. Like even in Quebec, even though Quebec is super nationalist, the root of their nationalism, which would be these powerful stories, are not told. So the nationalism basically just becomes this vacuous claim on language, which is ridiculous and is not going to hold. So anyways, that's what I think in terms. I think that if the French Canadians could reclaim their stories and do it in an epic way, right? Because this is also one of the problems we have. We can't think like ancient people anymore. It's like you can both love Samuel de Champlain, love the Christian martyrs, but then also you can also tell the story of the native populations, and you can actually hold those both in tension. If you're a subtle thinker and if you're a subtle person, it's like we have that in the story of the Trojan War, right? It's like when you read the Iliad, you can read it from the point of view of the Greeks or of the Trojans, and both of them make sense. So that is what my hope would be that we could recapture something of the miraculous and amazing foundations of the Québécois that also has a capacity to perceive the same story from the point of view of the native populations.
Do you have any storytelling projects, in the works regarding Quebecois universal history?
Well, I've thought about it, and I've talked about it with some people. I have a friend of mine, great guy, Christian Charbonneau, who's like a super expert on Quebec history, but also kind of Catholic Quebec history and spiritual aspects of Quebec history. And we talked about the idea of doing a type of story that would go back into the early colony and tell the mythical aspect, right? Really not shy away from the miracles and everything that's happening, but actually have, like I said, both sides. So actually have like the magic of the native people and the Catholics coming in with their saints and their relics and everything, and telling a subtle story that would take all that into account. But it's not like, let's just say I have a lot of things that I'm doing.
Right.
But I would love to do that one day. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that really interests me because, as like an Anglo-American, like my surname is on the Mayflower Compact, but I feel, as you could imagine, totally alienated from what America represents on the world stage, and in terms of it really had, like you said, vacuous. It's just become this kind of like gigantic black hole in terms of whatever American patriotism is at this point. It's just really deracinated. And yet me as like a heritage Anglo-American, like I don't jive with it at all. But what that vision of storytelling, colonial storytelling, like a vision of like telling the colonial story really appeals to me because, and then you can kind of see like certain figures like Longfellow, like the tale of Miles Standish, and he there's something going on there that you could maybe draw on in terms of preceding literary precedent, but
America has the Western, like the Western tropes are powerful. They're very mythical, and there would be ways, I think, to tell Western type stories that are balanced, right? That actually take into account the different actors in the story and could do it in an epic way. And I'm sure it's been done. I don't know much about the kind of the Western novels, but I think it's probably already been done. There could be a way to do it where it's not just either colonialist bad guys, native people good guys, or native people savages, colonial like that's, if we think that that's the only possible story, it's ridiculous. There actually should be a way to talk about these things in a manner that shows the complexity of the actual situation while maintaining the tropes, like while maintaining some of the powerful tropes that have entered into culture, of the gunslinger and all of these types of tropes that are quite strong.
Yeah. Cormac McCarthy, I mean, he's known for being like a kind of Western author, and I spoke to a girl in my church who was really into Cormac McCarthy, but there's a kind of grisliness and cynicism there that, at least it seems like prima facie that's kind of what's going on there.
But that's the problem with a lot of narrative now, is that it feels like in order to be serious, in order to be taken seriously by the elites, you have to be cynical and ironic, and you have to kind of present everything as this cynical power play. But that's running out. I think so. I think that stuff is running out, and you can kind of see it running out. Like the whole joke about how, the last Game of Thrones book cannot be written because it's over, right? This type of cynical storytelling, it basically leads to nihilism, and people can't live in nihilism. But it doesn't mean that we have to also then fall back into simplistic good guy, bad guy storytelling. We actually can tell more complex and subtle stories. Like I said, I mean, that's what we have in the Iliad. That's what we have in the Aeneid. Like when you read the Aeneid, you feel sorry for Dido. Like she's not the bad guy, although there are aspects that she is not the one that he should be with. Like the characters have more depth. That's what great literature is about. And by the way, that's what the Bible is. We tend to think that the Bible is just a simplistic good guy, bad guy story. But you can actually read the biblical narrative and the biblical stories from the point of view of the others, and you can see that there's a type of coherence in the structure. I always tell people, like, can you read the story of Exodus from the point of view of the Pharaoh? It's like, of course you can. It's not that hard, actually. It's like, okay, these guys are saying they want to go into the desert for 3 days. Oh, and they also want to take their wives and their kids and their animals. I'm a little suspicious about that. Like, that's what's really going on. You can actually read it from the point of view and understand some of the decisions that he makes, even though you can disagree ultimately with them. But that's how good storytelling functions.
Yeah, and I had a second question, but since this is related, your question is related to universal history, I'll hand it to you. But I can't remember what the second question is. Here you go, bro.
I think the birds had a couple of questions. But I'm going to steal the mic from them for a bit. I do have a question that's very directly related to what he originally asked you, but something that I kind of want to just throw in real quick is because you were talking about like real Western storytelling. Do you know who Marty Robbins is? Okay, he's an old like country, like 50s, 1940s, something like that, and I think you would like him. I don't know how you like that style of music, but I think you would like him just for the fact that he is a very, he kind of embodies the genuine spirit of like Western storytelling. His song El Paso, you probably know it. You've probably heard it before.
It's in Breaking Bad.
Yeah. You've probably heard it before, but it's not just a simple like good guy, bad guy story, and it's a very like engaging tale, and it's presented in the like a musical ballad, and it's very interesting. I think you would like that. But anyways, my question that's very related to what he initially asked you is, where does Canada fit into universal history, not just as like a part of the West, but as a unique entity, like not just sort of like the United States little brother, or are we just the United States little brother?
I mean, maybe at this point we are. I don't think that that's what it was at the outset. I mean, at the outset, what it was is that we were in some ways an alternative because we were the loyalists.
Yeah.
Right.
We always forget. We the people in the United States means we that are not the loyalists. That doesn't mean it's not actually we the people. It means we accept those that are loyal to the king. And so the Canadians ended up playing that role. And so I think that there is a little bit of an alternative to the American story, but I think that nonetheless, I mean, I think all of America basically has the same image, which is the far west, in the sense of the wild, in the sense of this massive potential that's on the edge of the world. and also in some ways, it is also from the point of view of universal history. That is from the point of view of kind of the Western perspective. It is in some ways encountering how can I say this? Like the peoples on the edge of the world. That is exactly what happened. And so obviously it's not as mythical as Pliny's version. But you know, when Christopher Columbus, the first day that he came on the coast, you know, he saw a dog-headed man. The people forget that, you know, and that's just how it is, right? It's like seeing this encounter with something that is completely strange and completely other. You know, that story is being told in the story of America, and so it is a way to understand what America is, like Canada and America, what it is. The fact that it is nonetheless the land of mixture, that seems to be inevitable. That it is a land of great riches, you know, but also, you know, a land of freedom. All of these things make sense of what it is to come to the edge of something, and it's you know, some of it's positive, some of it's negative, but that is what the edge looks like.
I mean, even like animals that we have up north, like what is a narwhal?
Yeah,
like this weird
they're monsters.
Like, blob in the water with a giant horn.
With a giant horn. That's right.
A
I mean,
unicorn
whales
that can
are
swim,
whales. All of these are really. It's like if you don't understand that a whale is a sea monster, folks. Really, like if someone tells you sea monsters don't exist, what are you talking about? Of course, sea monsters exist.
They've never seen a squid.
It's like exactly. What are you? Of course they exist. It's ridiculous to say they don't. You know, and so I think that's probably the way to kind of understand. And so if you look at the way that Canada, like in even the French Canadian, the way that it happened, this idea of the coureur de bois, right? This idea of the man that goes out into the wild and is like hunting animals and is living in the forest and then wears, you know, animal skins, like that is a very mythical image, you know, and it's a very powerful image that's at the foundation of Canadian culture. And I think it's still there. It's not completely there, but it's still kind of there. You know, that's why Europeans like to come to America or like to come to Canada, because they have a vision of, you know, the great land and this wild land with wild animals, and they have a romantic image of the Aboriginal cultures, and you know, they live close to nature and all of that stuff.
And
so,
moose. I had a German exchange student that lived with my family for a couple of months. He was like, I want to see a moose.
Yeah.
I really want to see a moose.
Yeah, like I want to see an elephant, or like I want to see a tiger, right? Yeah. And so I think that, because we live in these places, we forget that that's in some way the image that America and Canada has. And Canada is still very wild, far more than the U.S., because the North is just this giant expanse of land that is not tamed. And so I think that that's the way to understand it. And that's why that's why in Canada and in America, you have Bigfoot and Yeti and all of these monsters that are still part of the lore of our country, because that we have this massive unexplored wild land that will generate these types of stories just naturally. You can't avoid it. It'll just happen.
That brings me to probably the most important question of this interview right here. Does Bigfoot exist?
Let's say it this way. Bigfoot definitely exists as a monster. You know, and it's like, I think it's difficult because people don't totally understand what the category of a monster is, right? The category of a monster is to be something which is undefined. So let's say that I know this is hard for people to understand, but it's like if you caught Bigfoot, it would no longer be Bigfoot.
It would just be a guy, a really hairy guy.
Or it would say, oh, well, Bigfoot doesn't exist. We actually did find a species of northern apes.
Right.
So there's no Bigfoot. It's just a species of northern apes that we thought that or whatever, right? So it's like this is the issue with the notion of a monster, is that once you catch it, then you tame it, and once you tame it, then it becomes. So this is the same thing with when we talk about the whale. It's like, oh, sea monsters don't exist. That's a whale. Oh, interesting, right? It's like as soon as you capture it and name it, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, all those stories of sea monsters that the ancient mariners told, it was all in their imagination, right? No, it wasn't.
Right.
That's actually what the category of a monster is.
Yeah.
And so, the Bigfoot necessarily has to appear in a certain, have a certain structure. So Bigfoot has to be a half animal, half man, has to be hairy, has to be kind of ferocious. All of these things have to be part of the image of what Bigfoot is.
And he always has to be caught on like a really grainy
Yes,
video.
yeah, you never really see him. You see him, he's in the corner of your eye like all the monsters, right?
Yeah.
He's in that place where things are undefined. That's what a monster is. And so there's a coherence to Bigfoot that means that Bigfoot has a type of existence, but it's not exactly the type of existence that you think. Right? It's the same for a dragon. It's like, what's a dragon? Well, a dragon is a mixture of a bunch of different animals. So it actually doesn't have an identity.
Yeah.
It's something that is a mixture of identity. So it's like, it is the undefined itself. So Bigfoot, so I always say it almost exists.
Yeah.
Right.
Is the best way to say it.
So Bigfoot is like the spiritual animal of North America.
Well, he's a monster. He's a North American monster. We don't have in Canada. We don't have the same type of we don't have the pucks and the little familiar monsters that exist in Europe because we have the wild. We don't. The forests in England or France have nothing to do with the forests in northern Canada or like even here, Western America. What do you think? Imagine the first European that sees redwoods.
Yeah.
I mean, they are in another planet. They are in a world of giants. Like, of course they are.
Yeah. Unless either of you two have anything more directly related to
I just wanted to briefly ask you about, you mentioned that Bigfoot is like the undefinable, right? And I'm wondering, like, how does this relate?
But it's important to understand, it's important to understand that these monsters that people encounter, they're not just in their imagination. They're actually encountering phenomena.
Right.
Undefined phenomena, right? Something that I've encountered, but I don't know what it is. And therefore, the undefined presents itself in a certain coherent way by being undefined. It's a hybrid. It's a mixture. It's unclear. That's what a hybrid is. Right. Hybrid is something that is not clear, doesn't have a clear identity.
Right. And to make something a clear identity is, in the biblical way of presenting it, would be to give it a name, right? And that's what Adam does. He names the animals. So I was wondering, like, it seems like part of our task as, it is our task, made in the image of God, is to provide identity to a world which, independent of us, wouldn't have an identity because nothing else in the world can name itself. Nothing can delimit itself as a specific hypostasis, you could even say, like a specific identity. I'm wondering, like, how should we relate to these monsters? There seems like intuitively there's like a danger about trying to capture them. So, and I know you've talked about this before, but how should we relate to the monsters? Is our task are we supposed to be able to categorize them, or is it like until the eschaton, it's just something that needs to be something that just needs to be on the periphery, and there's something dangerous about trying to, by our own wills, to grasp it.
Are we supposed to invite Bigfoot to our cooking?
Yeah. So basically, so in the God's Dog graphic novel that my brother and I wrote, which is in part about monsters, we say there are three kinds of monsters in the world. There's the kind you tame, there's the kind you kill, and there's the kind you leave alone. And those are the three things you do with monsters. What is happening?
That's Discord.
It's causing discord.
And so basically that's the idea, is that the unknown is the unknown. But then once the unknown presents itself to you, those are the three types of things that you could do to the unknown. Is that one is you tame it. That is, you basically enter it into the world of meaning and into the hierarchy of categories. The other thing that you sometimes have to do is kill it. And I know that sounds weird, but it's like the unknown is dangerous to you. Sometimes you have to stop it. because it can eat you. And so if a sea monster is attacking you, like, it's now not the time to enter it into the category of ontological
Here's a tree.
structure. Exactly. It's like, well, let's look at I see that he has these characteristics. Let's write them down. No, you have to kill it, and that's a reality, of the. I mean, when you say kill it, it's like you have to stop it, right? And so if this, and then the other one is you have to leave them alone. It's like if there's a monster that's too big, basically just let it be. Don't try to figure it out. Because if it's bigger than you, trying to figure it out might mean your own doom, So, yeah.
This does tie into a question. I was going to ask it yesterday, but I think it's a bit of a big question, so I decided to wait for now. Yesterday, you talked about how the irregularity and particularity of chaos of the earth exists in contrast to like the fixed regularity of the heavens. Now, do you think part of that, and I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this question kind of as I'm saying it, so bear with me. Do you think part of that is just we haven't experienced the heavens close enough yet to see the irregularities up there? Because I mean, like, if we were to go to Jupiter, there'd be a lot of irregularity.
Yeah, but once you go to Jupiter, it's not heaven anymore.
Yeah.
It's like it's just. This is the weirdest thing. It's like heaven is not outer space, folks.
Mm-hmm.
Like heaven is heaven. Heaven is the experience of something above you. But outer space is a different thing altogether. One of the things that happened in the in space exploration in the scientific revolution is that we basically flipped everything upside down. And now what the ancients used to call heaven has now become the sea mariner's journey, has now become the outer darkness, this outer chaos and these outer dangers. And so we project, the types of things that we project now into what we call outer space is the type of thing that the ancients would have projected to the edge of the world, into these unknown spaces where there was no definition. And so the entire culture of extraterrestrials, like all of that type of all those tropes, they're basically the same as Gulliver's Travels, right? So Gulliver's Travels is on the ocean, and you go out and you encounter all these weird beings that are foils to you and are showing you aspects of yourself and are just particularizations of human characteristics that are taken to a point so that you can see it. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's what Star Trek is. Star Trek is exactly that. It's like, you have the Ferengi that are the business people, and then you have the Klingons that are kind of the warrior aspect of humanity. And so you can see, it's as if it's the outside, it's the extension of humans into the unknown, and then it appears as a particularization. But that, and so, and by the way, like when you read the Divine Comedy, Dante is on this hinge where it seems like he kind of intuits that we're going to change our perspective on reality. And so there's a place where I think it's Beatrice who warns Dante and says, okay, it's like basically they're going up the spheres of heaven, and they're going to encounter different souls that have different virtues that are analogical to the height of the spheres. And she tells them, it's like, well, the souls don't live in the spheres, folks. Right? This is a language of condescension, right? To make understandable to your mind what a hierarchy of heaven is. But we're not saying that this saint lives on Jupiter like the Mormons. Like we don't have this weird materialistic thing. So we have to be careful not to confuse the outer space narrative and the heaven narrative. They're not the same.
Something that I think kind of ties into this, and this is a thought that I've had for a while now, because there's a threefold structure of the cosmos presented to us in Genesis, where like there's the heaven of heavens, there's heavens, and then there's earth, right? And the celestial heavens are kind of presented to us in this ambiguous space because they're obviously created out of eretz, they're created out of material earth, but at the same time they're supposed to be an image of the immaterial heaven of heaven. So it's kind of presented as both earth and heaven. And there's a really interesting, I can't remember if it's Psalm 8, I think it's Psalm 8, where it says that it describes the celestial heavens as God's handiwork,
Mm-hmm.
and then later in that same psalm it says that God gives his handiwork, using the same word, to man to have dominion over.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm kind of getting at here is the material heavens, the celestial heavens, is that a piece of earth that we are supposed to expand our dominion over? Are we supposed to travel to space?
Oh. And once again, I think that we have to be careful not to like confuse these categories. When it talks about, I mean, this is really important. What you're saying is like the idea of the heaven of heavens, of pure immateriality, manifesting itself in lights that are hung in the skies and that are moving like a clock and are presenting regularities that are helping you understand the patterns of the world. That's a great way to understand what the difference is between the heavens that we see, which St. Augustine says is all earth. Like St. Augustine says, like, all the heavens that you see is earth, ultimately, in the sense of original creation narrative.
Yeah.
And that the heaven of heavens, they're the invisible visible purposes, the actual invisible purposes, the actual invisible reasons for everything to exist. And so that's right. Now, in the flip of the exile, you could call it, it's probably the best way to understand it is that one of the things that like the kind of Enlightenment narrative and scientific revolution does is that it inverts causality, right? It basically says causality comes from below. Causality is a bunch of stuff that comes from below. And that causality and that which is above is a kind of imaginary projection. That's what it leads towards, okay? Or that there's this weird separation. But once you're in exile, then everything is upside down. So, like I said, I know this sounds weird to people, but like taking a spaceship and going into outer space has nothing to do with heaven. It has nothing to do with the heaven that is described in Scripture. They're the reverse of each other. Even though you might say, well, they're the same. Well, they're not. They're actually not the same. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, are we meant to go to outer space? I don't know. It just that seems like a question that is rather irrelevant to most of us. Like, that is it's very speculative.
Yeah. That's part of what makes it fun.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't think about that too much. So, if humans are meant to travel to other planets, then the story that we need to understand that is the story of the mariner. It's the story of the colonizer. It's the story of, similar to the story of Christopher Columbus that goes out into the ocean, into the unknown, and then discovers new lands. And so that is so if that would happen, that's what it would look like. It wouldn't look like Dante ascending the heavens and going
Right.
to encounter the prime mobile and the infinite like that.
Yeah.
That is not what it would look like. And that's also, by the way, like when we tell stories about it, when we tell stories about going out and encounter, those are the stories we tell. We tell stories that are akin to Gulliver's Travel or to this idea of discovering new lands.
Yeah. So, does Jonathan Pageau endorse churches on Mars?
If there are people on Mars, there should be churches on Mars for sure. Yeah.
So I have a question that, keeping it there. So I have a question that'll lead into some of the theological stuff you want to talk about, Trey, but it's kind of another universal history question, and it relates to France. So a lot of our most kind of beloved theological figures are, among the Russian Émigrés, right? So you have the Bolshevik Revolution jumping off, and then once the Soviet Union kind of crystallizes in the early 1920s, there's the philosopher's ship, right? They take all these Russian religious philosophers from the Russian religious Renaissance, and they basically put them on ships, and if they don't kill them, of course, and then they expel them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them end up in Paris, obviously. You have the St. Sergius Theological Institute, Sergei Bulgakov, Lasky, Shmemin, Florovsky, all these guys are there in Paris. What do you think of that in terms of symbolism, universal history? What do you make of and actually these guys had an influence on the Catholic Church. So I think was it Evdokimov that was invited to sit at the Second Vatican Council? I can't remember, but so these guys had an influence on the theological culture of the West. But they're, so you have these Russian immigrants who are expelled from the Soviet Union, they end up in Paris. What do you think's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way to understand it is in some ways the seed being planted. That's the best way to understand it, is that basically you have something that is dying or something that is at its end, and then a remnant is taken out, and then that becomes a seed for something new. And the OCA and the story of Orthodoxy in America is extremely linked to the story of the Russian Émigrés, obviously. And so I think that's really the best way to see that and to understand that, and to see also the surprise in some ways of how ideas spread. It's not always the way we think it is. The same thing happens, by the way, in the West with the fall of Constantinople, because few people realize that the Renaissance is based on these Greek thinkers moving to Italy, and bringing a lot of the texts that were lost to the West. So it's neither a good or bad thing. But it is this image of something being ending, and then a seed being transplanted into a new place. And so you have a lot of people that actually that if you're in the Orthodox world, you'll have a lot of people criticize those thinkers as being compromised sometimes, or as having had some strange ideas. But that's also the situation of planting a seed in a new place, is that you can't take a seed and plant it in a new place and expect the tree to be the same as what it was when it was before. That it will be both continuation and disruption. That is just how it functions. And if we understand that, then we shouldn't be surprised, and we should be able to see that just because something is somewhat of a disruption doesn't mean that it's not good. It can be bad, but not necessarily. So Losky, one of the reasons why Losky influenced me so much is that I was reading kind of 19th century type, maybe you could say kind of occultist types. And Losky took a lot of their language into his book. And you see that even in Florensky, who was still in Russia. But there's a desire to say, well, it's like there's a Western esoteric language. And we think that some of the things we're trying to communicate to the West can be communicated using that the esoteric language. And so it's like we're not afraid of doing that. We're going to use the similar words, and that'll help people connect to Orthodoxy. And so, myself having had some experience in the Western esoteric tradition, what I saw in these texts was actually a recovery in a positive way, because all of a sudden it's reorienting it towards Christ, reorienting the mysticism towards Christianity, a real tradition of prayer, of hesychasm, not something that broke away from the church, sometime in the 17th century, like a lot of the secret societies in the West. So it was a way to say, well, we're going to take some of the stuff that is actually kind of wild, but it's good, and we're going to bring it and we're going to represent it to people, and it will save the best aspects of it. And so I think that's amazing, but it means that sometimes it's going to step off course, obviously. But that's okay, because the church has a mechanism. The church has an organic mechanism to keep what is good and to slowly expel what is bad. It's sometimes messy, but I think that it's something that at this point has already happened.
Right. Yeah, the church has an immune system.
Yeah, it has its own immune system, and it can take things, leave things, and will be influenced. Even will be influenced by authors while telling you they're heretics. It's like, for example, Origen is obviously a heretic. But the idea that Origen didn't influence Christianity is just, you have to be an idiot to think that. Origen had a massive influence on Christianity. There's a reason why the Cappadocians published his book, is because the influence of Origen on the Cappadocians was so strong. So we can both say Origen is a heretic, but then nonetheless the immune system of the church will kind of weed out what is heretical, and we'll be able to capture and keep what is good, and then make it move forward. And I think it's the same with the Russian Émigré situation. It's like people can say, okay, well, Bulgakov was a heretic or whatever, but it's like, yeah, okay, well, no, whatever, but his ideas are still going to have a massive amount of influence, and the influence that is good will be kept and will continue on.
Right. I have a question about, because you're saying we can keep the good stuff. So a little background about me. I came to Orthodoxy through the works of Slavoj Žižek, very directly. And
that's weird.
It is very weird because Žižek is, I mean, he calls himself a Christian atheist. Like his reading of the crucifixion is literally like the opposite of us. While we see the crucifixion as the necessary event for the resurrection, for Žižek it's just you have the crucifixion, and he likes to quote this passage from Chesterton's Orthodoxy where he says that all rebels and all anarchists should look to the Christian religion because only in the Christian religion does God himself become an atheist. Now, I don't think I agree for theological reasons with that language, and you see how it's sort of misunderstood by Žižek is one example, because for him, when you what he sees with the crucifixion is just you realize that the absolute itself contains this inner negativity and this inner contradiction. So Žižek is not a Christian thinker. Now, what led me to Orthodoxy was the paradoxes that Žižek gets to, and the fact that Žižek describes, like, for example, the central idea in Žižek's philosophical system is his understanding of the subject, because he is basically out of the German idealist tradition, and then he brings in psychoanalysis and stuff. And when he describes his subject, if we could say that the subject, the way we understand it, is the communal person, right? Always in relation, and that our relation is sort of what defines us, doesn't exhaust us, but we're inseparable from our relations. For Žižek, he defines the subject as a void of self-relating negativity. So like just a void of pure contradiction. And what I realized is that there is something true about this in the sense that he's describing something true about the fallen world. There is something true, that there is this void within us, this tendency to self-relate, to withdraw from communion. And I've done a lot of videos on this channel about Žižek and bringing Žižek into Orthodoxy, and my thesis about Žižek's subject is that this emptied void of pure contradiction is Gehenna. This is what happens. Like, this is a philosophical articulation of what happens when you get rid of all communion, when you get rid of all relation. So you were saying that we can keep the good stuff. I'm wondering if, like, because you've read Derrida and stuff, and there's stuff in Derrida, like Derrida has this idea of the impossibility of giving a gift, because when you give a gift, the person who gives a gift, as soon as they give it, they have this feeling, oh, I just gave a gift, I should get something back. It becomes a transaction, right? Yeah. And to me, it's like, well, what's an example of a communion of gift giving that doesn't have that? The Trinity, right? So it seems like what Derrida is articulating is something true. It's like the reason he gives for the impossibility of the gift, really, he wouldn't use this term, but it's pride, right? It's this pride, like I give the gift, I should get one back. And the person who gives a gift feels like, or receives a gift, feels like a sense of debt and stuff. So like, because I know you've read like the postmodernists and stuff. Do you see like the value in this, and like seeing the sort of the negative, the false aspects of it? But since we live in a fallen world, there's a way we can say true stuff about false things. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think in the case of what you describe of Žižek, I think that is, you're right. He is describing something that is real and that exists. But the problem. The problem is that there's also an aspect of us that doesn't want that, right? So it's like we want to be in communion, and so he could say that it's an illusion, that ultimately we're all these negative self-relating, fragmented thing. But the fact that there is a thrust in human consciousness and in human existence to desire relationship and communion, that is a real thing. You just can't ignore it. Yeah. You can't just say, okay, well, this is the real thing, this is the illusion. Yeah. And the fact that desire that we have towards the other to be in communion is in some ways impossible, that it never is resolved, that is also something real. And you could say that, like you said, that accounts for the fall philosophically. Like, you might not like, if you think that the story of the fall, like, you don't understand it because it's mythological and the way that it's written, it's very, it looks like a story, whatever, but you can understand that in some ways is philosophically what accounts for the fall, is that we realize our situation, but we also see in ourselves someone who wants more, and we'd wonder what that more is because we don't have access to it. So how is it that I can want more? Where does that want more come from? So you're saying, like, for millions of years of evolution. Like, I've never could have that. And it's never, but nonetheless, I have it in me to want something that is not part of reality. It's like, okay, we have to take that into account.
Right.
And so then it becomes actually easier to understand the structure of the fall and why we present it in the way we do. And that the elan, like that thrust towards communion, is something that you can't ignore. And then the surprise of it is in some ways that there is an aspect which is mysterious, which is that the communion doesn't come from getting from others, right? You actually will never find someone who will fill that desire that you have. It's not going to happen. The only way you can access it is actually by emptying yourself, by giving yourself. And so you can flip that idea of this kind of negativity or this emptiness. You can flip it in a manner which is completely in line with Christian thinking,
right.
Which is that you reach that fullness by emptying yourself, by giving yourself out, not by receiving the right amount of affection or love or whatever that you think you're owed or that you think would fill you up, because that's not true. That's unreal.
Right. Yeah, it's like a great way to demonstrate that sort of this is the topic of your third speech yesterday, was like identity is ecstatic. The way you can demonstrate this is by sort of showing the impossibility to the contrary. Like, what would be the contrary to that would be a purely self-relational identity. And you just did a video on this on the Ouroboros. And Chesterton in Orthodoxy has a great quote that one's tale is a very unsatisfactory meal.
That's right.
But if you think through, I've talked about this before a lot on this channel, if you think through the logic of the Ouroboros, like, I think the way the ancient pagans sort of understood it was like as a symbol of like the eternal harmonious cyclical return. But I think actually the more, like the truth of this symbol is what happens when the serpent consumes all of its body. All that, like, it will consume itself, but you can't perform this, like, I mean, you cannot perform a pure self-relation. It cannot just annihilate itself because it can't eat the very means by which it eats. So what remains once you take the Ouroboros to its fullest conclusion is just this empty gaping mouth, just of pure desire. And I think this is like the sort of a symbol of this Žižekian subject that you're talking about, this emptiness, that once you confront this emptiness, it's like, well, where do we go from here? And it's just exactly what you would expect given like a thesis that identity is ecstasis or identity is communion. It just sort of makes sense.
And you know about the mouth of hell, right?
Yeah.
And so that is a good example of that. On the Ouroboros video, I actually show that the mouth of hell is related to the Ouroboros symbolism, that it actually is they're derivative of each other.
Right.
Žižek's subject is the hungry ghost of Buddhism. It's like C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce. There's no longer a grumbler, it's just a grumble, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to bring up was to sort of talk about phenomenology, because you've sort of advocated this return to phenomenology and a return to understanding or looking at just our experience as sort of like concrete beings in the world. And I think phenomenology kind of stands in contrast to German idealism, because if you can say phenomenology is this openness towards the given, to the other in experience, idealism is sort of the opposite. A great example, like the quintessential example, is Fichte, who instead of having any confrontation with the outside world, he attempts to deduce all of reality from the self-positing I. That's his whole philosophical project. And it is quite, frankly, quite satanic, like deducing all of reality from yourself. So I think phenomenology kind of stands in contrast to this German idealist tendency to try to to see reality as derivative of reason instead of reason as like an encounter with reality. And I think phenomenology really works well with Christianity, because I think it really reveals that faith is the essential structure of all, or a necessary precondition of any experience whatsoever. Because like an atheist may say, I have no faith in anything. I only believe in what is absolutely certain. And you can say, well, how do you know you're even talking to me. Like you get to a point where it's just like you have to have an affirmation of, if you want to encounter something other, just by virtue of the fact that it's other, there is no justification for that other within yourself. There has to be this moment of faith where you confront, where you meet the other in this communion of openness. And something else about like returning to experience, this is sort of a Bulgakovian point, a very Trinitarian point, and I know you kind of get nervous talking about Trinitarian stuff, but the Bulgakov talks about how we are all subjects, and this is like true about reality. We are subjects. We are in relation to something other, and this is like the second order. And then we always meet within a third, right? And then he has like this Trinitarian understanding here where our very experience testifies to the reality of the Trinity. And in your brother's book, Language of Creation, he makes this point that like in our scientific worldview, we're so abstracted from our phenomenal experience. We're kind of like aliens trying to look at the world from like this purely outside perspective. But this point of just pure outsideness is like impossible, basically. I don't really have a question. I'm wondering if you could sort of just talk more about like the significance of phenomenology and how it's sort of relevant to recovering a worldview of meaning and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, my take on phenomenology is it's not necessarily to posit it as a philosophical solution to what we're going through, but it's mostly to use it as an example of a way of encountering meaning that is different from this kind of rationalistic, abstracted vision,
right?
And that the position of the conscious being, receiving this given world to them in a certain manner, is the position that is presented in Scripture,
right?
And it really is the position that is presented in all the ancient stories, and if we can't. And it is the position that you live in. Like,
right.
Let's be honest. Like the idea of the scientific way of understanding reality is an abstraction. You do not live in that world. Like the solar system is an abstraction, folks. Like you never encounter the solar system in your life, and you never will, right? And nobody really will, right? You can't encounter the solar system. It is a kind of weird point of view from nowhere that abstracts a system and then presents it to you in a kind of schema. And it doesn't mean that it has no value at all. It does have value. It has value for certain reasons, but that is not the world you live in. The world you live in is the same world that Homer lived in, thousands of years ago. Right. And if we can re-enter into that space, then it's valuable to us because we can recapture all the meaning of the ancient stories. Without that, we are aliens to our own stories. We read the ancient stories and they just look like a bunch of weird mumbo jumbo superstitious nonsense. But that is not useful, right? That is not a useful world to live in. And there's a type of alienation which is part of that point of view, because the same person who has that type of thinking, and it's like, oh, this is all nonsense, mumbo jumbo stuff, and this ridiculous idea of heaven above and all this blah 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 blah. It's like that same person will play video games and will literally put themselves in a reductive version of an ancient cosmos in order to find some kind of excitement for their life.
Right.
And so, if we can just kind of enter back into our body and walk outside and see that light comes from above and darkness is below. And the idea that hell is underground is one of the most reasonable propositions ever. And the idea that God is in heaven is actually quite reasonable based on your experience. If we can kind of re-enter into that world, then all of a sudden we have access to the ancient magic. Like we have access to the ancient spirit that animated all these stories once again. And you can do that without being naive. You can still believe in rockets and quasars or all that stuff. It doesn't matter, but they're secondary, right? They're not the primal position, and so that's why I tend to talk about phenomenology, and that's one of the reasons why I think Heidegger is so important. is because he opens up that possibility once again for us. He's one of the people that opened it up, and his insight in that opening up, is very helpful to understand human making, the way that we deal with identity, the way that we deal with what presents itself in care, right? So the Dasein, Heidegger's idea of care, is very important. Like it's very important like you can read Dante and Heidegger, and you can say, well, actually, when Heidegger talks about Dasein and the idea that the field of experience is made of care, it's like that's what Dante's talking about too. And that's actually when we talk to a lot of the cognitive psychologists today, and that's what Jordan Peterson talks about, and John Vervaeke and all these people, is that identity is actually based in care. There are no identities, abstracted identities, that they're related to relevance, and so these are all the best categories for people to live in, and it can really, like, going back into that world can really pull you out of nihilism, can really help you not, all the kind of Neil deGrasse Tyson type reductionist arguments, they just go away. They just fall. You don't even hear them anymore, because it's like, well, I don't even know what are you talking about? Like, none of these things are important.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Heidegger, because Heidegger, he talks about in Being and Time, he talks about living inauthentically, or no, he talks about losing your being to the they, he calls it, or the world. And the world is actually that term, I think it's Isaac the Syrian who says that the world is used by the spiritual fathers to refer to, like, the passions in general, right? So, I mean, like, Heidegger kind of, in this articulation of living the inauthentic life and losing your being to the world, it just seems like, I mean, it really does parallel this, like, losing your freedom and losing your authentic selfhood to the passions and to the world. So, yeah.
Okay, I have a question about actually you mentioned heaven and earth and how and you talked about this in your speech yesterday, how God is beyond heaven and earth, but when heaven and earth, from the perspective of creation, where heaven and earth exist, not that they don't exist from God's perspective, I'm not saying it's only perspectival or whatever, but God manifests himself in heaven most properly. And I was wondering, so there's this figure, and I know John Vervaeke really likes this figure, John Scotus Eriugena, right? Who's this very interesting character. He's an Irishman, that's the Scotus in his name. Actually, Eriugena also means basically Irishman. And he's from Ireland, which is an interesting place already, because it's the very fringe, and like Coptic monasticism and knowledge of Greek was kind of preserved in Ireland longer than anywhere else in the West. But he becomes a student in Byzantine Athens, and he goes to a philosophical, theological academy there, and he knows Maximus and Augustine. So he's this interesting, like, liminal figure. But he has this text called The Division of Nature, right? The four divisions of nature. And for nature here, I think kind of just means all of reality, because he's not even just talking about actually, he's not even just talking about reality, he's also talking about, like, non-being. So you have the four divisions of nature, the cause that is not caused, the causes that are caused, that which is not caused and is caused, and you have that which is not caused and is not cause. So, and for, did I say that right? Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either.
Well, I was just saying, anyway. So you have these four divisions, and both the top and the bottom are God for Eriugena. Creation ex nihilo is creation ex deo, right? So I was wondering about, what do you think about that idea and this gets into John Vervaeke stuff too, because this is why there's this guy named Filler who he's talking to our friend Eric about recently. He talked about Heidegger and Neoplatonism and how relation is actually ultimate, because it's quite complex. But basically, you could go, and he's into Nishitani, right? This Japanese author who talks about, in the West, nothingness is negative. It's this kind of, it signifies, so like in Plotinus, it's evil, nothingness is evil. Whereas Nishitani, nothingness is, and the Far East, that is, tends to view this as more kind of a realm of potential. It's actually kind of the fountain of all things. And so where do you see the mediating point between these two things, and why is it still nonetheless, despite all this kind of non-dual stuff, most appropriate to say God is in heaven, God is identified with heaven, even though he obviously transcends the duality?
Okay, so this stuff is definitely the kind of stuff you shouldn't talk about, because this is the problem. So a good way...
Sorry, John.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So it has to do with the problem of secret, and it has to do with the problem of what the dark potential, what its purpose is, right? And so if you think of, there's a mysterious way in which we talk about, God as being beyond being, and there are even some of the church fathers that use very strange words, like I think it's Saint Isaac the Syrian who talks about the womb of the divine. Okay, so these are very difficult notions that are difficult, and one of the reasons is because some of the aspect of God that is beyond being is the aspect of God that we should not speak of, because that's what it is. That's what it is not, right? Mm-hmm. That's the problem of things that are beyond being, and so it's very dangerous to want to talk about all that, because you are betraying its mystery in the very pronunciation of the mystery. And so this is one of the problems of the mystery of the feminine, and why everybody today wants to talk about the divine feminine. Like everybody just wants to, it's like, let's talk about the divine feminine. Let's what's the divine feminine? What is that? And the answer is shut up. Like, that's basically the answer. Is like to the extent that there is a relationship between, let's say, the lower aspect, or the tohu bohu, and the non-being of God, then you should not talk about it. It's pretty simple. I know it's annoying, because the things we talk about, they're the patterns. They come from patterns of being. Therefore, that is what we talk about when we talk about God, because that is what positive speaking is. Positive speaking and propositions and all the things that are related to pattern and light and manifestation, those are the things that make up meaning and make up language and make up the things we can encounter. And so then when we say God in heaven, because God in heaven, that's the only thing you can even talk about.
Right.
And I think that it's really important to understand, like, this is the problem of non-dualism. I always say Christianity is a non-dual religion, but it is the problem of understanding that non-dualism manifests itself in dualism, right? You do not have manifest non-dualism. In order for non-dualism to become something that you can even speak about or encounter or allude to, then you enter into dualism. And you have to respect the reality of dualism when you speak about it. And that's the problem of all the weird esoteric crap. Like, all of that stuff is, I think, is a misunderstanding of this problem, which is they're trying to make non-dualism manifest, and they're doing it in a way that is destructive to reality, because they try to get that dark stuff out, right? The whole cliche, about the Sabbateans, right? Like this notion that, the Jacob Frank type esotericists that say, well, if God is beyond being, therefore we should also break the law, right? Because God is not bound by that. And if we want to transcend duality, then we should both follow the law and break the law.
Vajrayana.
Yeah, and that is like a vortex. That's like bringing a vortex into reality. That is literally a monster eating the world. Now, the truth is that the non-dual aspect of God did manifest in the world. But it looks like a king on a cross. Like, it looks like the crucifix. That's what it looks like. It looks like, in order for it to be true, it has to be a self-emptying. It has to be a kind of the paradox of the crucifixion. That's the only way, and I think that the crucifixion is the only fully manifest or eternal temporal collision that helps us understand the non-dual aspect of reality and the non-dual aspect of God as well.
Would you say it's the only way not to confuse the divine darkness with the darkness of the waters?
So this is how can I say this? Let's do it this way. Christ is the only one who can join them together. Christ is the only one who was able to make them one. But in that, they are not the same. They are different. In the world of being, those two are separate and opposite. And the higher waters and the lower waters are not the same. They are separate. And the lower waters will destroy you. They will eat you. They will dissolve you, right? And the higher waters will dissolve you into glory. But they're not. Those two are not. I know it's horrible because I'm telling you, Jesus made them the same. He really did, right? Because the crown of thorns is the crown of thorns. It is exactly that. But as soon as people try to make that too manifest and try to declare it too strongly, then you get some ridiculous tantric figure eating rotten fish, right? Or you get some weird incestuous cannibalistic crazy symbolism, and it's like, no, that's death, that is destruction, that is the loss of you, right? It is not some esoteric great mystery. It actually will destroy you. Anyways, I'm not talking to everyone when I'm talking, but the people to who I'm talking to, you know who you are. Like that. Let's just say that way.
You're the ones eating rotten fish.
That's right. That's
right. This all kind of ties into stuff that you've been talking about for years now, about like the difference between a fool and a holy fool.
Right. That's a good way to think about it. And
I think you said something that is just exactly the point of this, is that it has to be self-emptying. The way that pride and self-emptying will manifest themselves is oftentimes in similar actions, in the sense of like uniting the above and the below, but the intention behind it is opposite and completely different, where one is doing it for the sake of, I want to take all of this and be the one to get rid of duality. Whereas from the Christian perspective, it's like Christ, where he's just giving himself to everything.
Well, my brother Matsir has a great way to know if you're dealing with a fool, like a regular fool or a holy fool. And the holy fool will always end by turning the joke against himself. That is how the holy fool, that is how you know what a real fool is from what a utilitarian, power-hungry fool is. And so if you can see that ultimately the fool is willing to let the joke fall back on them, that's how you know that you're dealing with something maybe a little more subtle than someone who just thinks that they're... Because there are people like that think that they are justified in acting the fool, but usually they do it for dark reasons.
Yes. This kind of ties into everything that Telos found has kind of been about from the beginning, which is the idea of like ontology being a communal thing. Like existence itself is communion. It is all just about the self-emptying, and the whole language of like foolishness, fool, folly ties into Proverbs, obviously, where Proverbs is kind of all about this contrast between lady wisdom and lady folly. And something that I've said before to our viewers is read Proverbs and replace folly with self-relation and wisdom with communion, and it makes perfect sense. Folly is the fool rejects counsel. The fool in Ecclesiastes, this is a really, really crazy verse. It says he folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Yeah. Like the fool is all about this consumption, and self-relation, whereas wisdom seeks the counsel of others. Wisdom listens in the courts and so on and so forth. I'm sure you might have something you want to add here.
Well, I think that, but it's important to understand that we always have to remember that Christ becomes a fool. I know this is weird, but Christ is made a fool in the torture before the crucifixion. But it's there. You can it's hard to think about, but if you want to understand the difference between a regular fool and a holy fool, meditating on what happens during the Ecce Homo phase of the crucifixion is a good way to see how that turning can turn back into glory ultimately. The martyrs often have that aspect. Some of the martyrs are made into kind of clowns in the circus, but ultimately it turns on them, and then it becomes to their glory.
Well, there's the examples of like Saint Porphyrios the actor, where his whole job was to be a fool. He mocked the divine liturgy, and then one day he baptizes himself, and whoa,
he's actually baptized. That's right. Yeah, that's a wonderful story.
Yeah, I love that story very much. Do you have anything you want to add now that we're talking about communal ontology?
Well, I mean, one thing I'll just mention is that I think that like this attempt at we were talking about communal ontology and like you can't have a self-relational being, but this is equally true about experience and knowledge as well, and even self-knowledge. It's like you know yourself through knowing others, and that's sort of the paradox, because if you think about it, trying like a pure self-reflection is kind of akin to like an eyeball trying to stare at itself. It's like kind of impossible. Like you are the very means by which knowledge occurs. So how could you have this purely self-referential experience? It just doesn't seem very, very coherent. So I just was going to mention that.
Yeah, that's right.
I did have another question that I was gonna bring up earlier while we were talking about like the symbolism of the West.
We'll go for like 15 more minutes.
Sure.
1 hour and a half. Okay.
I was gonna talk about rap music because I brought up Marty Robbins as an example of good, authentic Western storytelling where he gives a captivating story and he does it in an entertaining and engaging way with music. But I mean, obviously you've talked about like Kanye West before. And I'm not too sure how familiar you would be with like more of like the new rappers that are out there now, where all the explicit themes that we see in older rap, like even in Kanye West, he kind of falls under the category of older rap now. All the explicit themes that we see in there, and all sort of like the meaningless aspects of it that we see where words kind of start to lose meaning, is really starting to come up now with rappers not even really speaking English anymore. It's just mumbling on a microphone with bass that's so loud that you can't even really hear what they're saying. And when you do look up the lyrics, they're just talking about the most explicit things you could imagine. So it's like, where do you, I guess the question that I'm really trying to get at here is, where do you see this going? Is it possible to like redeem the genre? So
redeem rap?
Without, this is crucial, without falling into the trap of 99% of Christian rap, which is just sort of like this vulgar, running
into public.
Read your Bible, like kind of like.
I've never listened to Christian rap. I even know.
You're probably better off.
To be honest.
I mean, is it redeemable? I think all things are redeemable, but it just depends on how they're used. I thought that Ye's album, the Jesus is King album, I thought it was a surprising album, and I thought that there were aspects of that which could be expanded on, and even Donda, I would say too, like there were some really interesting aspects in it that could be expanded on. But it's a difficult. The whole position of pop culture and pop music is always a difficult place to stand in, because its entire substrate is subversive to some extent. Now, it doesn't mean that subversive things can't ultimately flip back, but it's difficult to do that, and most people get lost in it. Because there's also the aspect of fame, and there's not just the actual art itself. There's everything that comes with it: the attention, the girls, the fame, the access to any of your desires. Like that is something that is almost impossible to ignore, right? And I think there are some interesting stories of redemption. Like, a really good example is how Johnny Cash, this is not a rap song, but like how Johnny Cash redid Nine Inch Nails song, right?
Yeah.
So the Nine Inch Nails song is about self-harm and this kind of masochistic world. But then Johnny Cash does the exact same song, but he transforms it into a song about pathos and about getting ready to die. And he literally doesn't change any of the words. But when you hear, if you told someone who had never heard the Nine Inch Nails song that it was a song about a kind of teenage self-harm and masochistic thinking, they say, what? How could, no, that's not what the song is about.
Yeah.
The song is clearly about someone who's preparing himself to die. It's like, that is an astounding flip, and I think that those types of flips are possible, but they're difficult. They're not easy to do.
Something that like I've heard from multiple people is it's Johnny Cash's song now. Like
That's
it's not,
right.
It's not
He's
their song
taken it
anymore.
from Nine Inch Nails. They lost it.
Nobody. I don't know anybody that likes their version of the song.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, but an idea that Trey and I have kind of tossed back and forth, specifically about like the new generation of rap, where it's just all mumbling, you can't really understand it, is I think that opens up a window of opportunity for it to self-invert, where it's like, because you can't really understand the words anymore, you can now sort of like sneak in things that
It's kind of like a veil.
Yeah, exactly.
Like with the excessive autotune, it's kind of like, and it can be very beautiful, like a beautiful, like kind of like a beautifully ordained bride. But the problem is with modern rap music, it's like, okay, I don't understand it. Let me look up the lyrics. Oh, this is horrifying, right?
Ugly.
Yeah, she's ugly underneath, right? So we were just talking about like how there's like that potential there with like specifically with like heavy autotune and this ability to make these
and the heavy instrumentals,
right,
that, like,
yeah,
drown out the
like,
voice.
and it's very beautiful. But the problem is, like, usually in most rap, it's like underneath is perverse, but there seems to be a sort of potential there for something.
Yeah, I don't think it's impossible, but I think that, and in some ways there are some, I'm not saying that it will remain rap, but at some point that this idea, there's a limit to where you can go. At some point you reach like rock bottom. It's like,
just
okay,
noise at some
so
point.
exactly,
Right.
It just becomes noise, and people really don't like listening to noise. So there's a well, maybe they
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
It's like
The only time people seem to like listening to noise is trying to fall asleep.
That's right. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Just listening to it. So just like all of the storytelling that's happening now, and how we're watching Hollywood collapse, we're watching all the big media companies basically run out of steam. For also self-referential, the problem of like constant self-referential acts, where it's like, okay, how many times can you reboot Transformers? Like, how many times can you, like, how, at some point,
How many Fast and Furious movies can you
yeah,
make?
exactly. It's like you just basically, the Roboros is running out of body, right? Like,
yeah.
So I think that is just, at some point, it's an inevitable thing that's going to happen, and something will fill that body with new form. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know what it's going to look like. But I think rap is just, if we take it as just a specific example, it's better to take pop culture in general, to think like some things will rise out of the mush, like out of the just like seeds get planted in manure. It's like in the manure of popular culture, some things will rise.
Isn't that symbolically analogous to how it was, Koine Greek that became the language of the New Testament, which was the common. It was a kind of deracinated Attic Greek that was spread by Alexander's armies, basically.
Yeah.
By Semitic speakers, spoken by Semitic speakers.
Yeah, and it's the same with Dante. Like there's a reason when Dante wrote in Italian. And there is a mysterious element, like Saint Dionysius talks about how there's a mysterious manner in which the highest things actually get reflected in the lowest things, because the waters are, if they are still, they become a mirror for the highest aspect, which is why, for example, like in the Orthodox tradition, you'll have the fathers will warn everybody about dream interpretations, like most of your dreams are nonsense. It's a bunch of chaos. It's your passions, your desires, what you ate. Like that's what's making don't pay attention to it. But once in a while, obviously, that stillness, like of someone who has fought the passions and has lived a life of noetic prayer, at some point that becomes like glass, and then all of a sudden the light can reflect, and then you can really have a true vision in your sleep. But for 99% of us, that's not the case. And so I think that's the reality, is that whatever is going to happen is going to be like a resurrection. Like, maybe that's the way to understand it. Whatever is going to come out of this kind of chaos will be that which will be able to still the nonsense, and a new seed will grow out of it.
What you said about like the higher and the lower, like Saint Dionysius talking about how the higher and the lower will often appear similarly. That's why in Psalm 22 Jesus is called a worm. And I think that I wish we had like another hour to talk about that, because we have a lot of I think unique ideas about Jesus Christ as the worm and how it relates to Jonah, actually. But we can do that.
Well, we can get into it very quickly. I think just introduce it.
I can't do it quickly.
I'll do it quickly because I'm not as smart as you on this. So Nate had this idea that when he was reading Psalm 22, Psalm 22 is the psalm Christ quotes on.
We got it from Jonah.
Okay, from Jonah, where there's this plant in the final chapter of Jonah. There's the fiery east wind, and there's the plant that shades Jonah, and what unveils or what destroys the plant and unveils the fiery presence of God. It symbolizes God. It's a worm, right? And Christ on the cross, he quotes Psalm 22, and in Psalm 22, that the psalmist identifies himself as the worm. So Nate was relating this to the idea of the worm that doesn't die as this very orthodox idea of the worm is the presence of Jesus Christ in the
destroying the
veils between the subject and God. But as we know, this for those who have turned their wills against God, this unveiling, the worm unveiling the presence of God, is actually an experience of torment. It's overwhelming.
And that's why there's an ambiguity kind of at the end of Jonah, where it's like he's angry at God and he has this kind of final chance before the worm destroys the veil, where he has the choice to either align himself with that willful embrace of God's presence, not just to himself but to others as well, or he can have that final moment of choosing to turn against that and be melted by the eastern sun. And obviously this relates to the fact that in the Old Testament, worms are what created the veils. The veils were made out of specifically talking about like the inner veil between the Holy of Holies and the Holy Place. It was created by worms. So it's very fitting that, symbolically speaking, what destroys the veil is a worm. It's taking back what originally belonged to it, but put there for our sake, that we don't get destroyed by it.
I don't think that the veil is made of. I think it's made of linen. It's not made of silk.
But it's dyed with scarlet, which is from worms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The worm is the snake, folks. Like, it's pretty simple, not simple. And the story of Jonah is a joke. It's a parody, because it's a reverse fall. That's not a way to understand Jonah. He moved from the monster in the water, out of the water, into the city. If I think about the story of the fall, so you have Adam and Eve in the garden. They listen to the snake, then they're cast out, and then they move out, and then they have to be covered in garments of skins. They build cities. That city gets corrupted, and then ultimately you come to the flood. Jonah goes backwards. He's in the flood, then he goes up. He encounters the city. The city repents. Then he's in the garden. He's like, when he's outside of the city, he's in the Garden of Eden. But and then the covering, is good to protect him from the spirit and the sun, right? It's like the connection directly with God, and then and then it's like the worm removes it's going backwards. Like the worm removes the garment, and then makes him access and so it is really an image of what Christ is going to do. Christ does exactly that. Christ reverses the fall and becomes the serpent. This is something that's hard for Christians to understand. Sometimes it's like, oh, what are you saying? It's like, Christ does become the serpent. He says it himself. He says that he becomes the serpent. But it's doing it in right relationship, right? So the difference between what Christ does and what happens to Adam is that Christ does not want to eat the fruit. And he says, God, if you can take this cup away from me. Like, he doesn't want it. And then God basically says, you'll eat the fruit and you'll die. And then Christ says, yes. Right. And so it's the complete opposite of what Adam did. Right. God said, don't eat the fruit. Adam takes it for himself. And then God says, well, if you eat the fruit, you'll die. And Adam says, no, I don't want to die. It's her fault. It's his fault. It's everybody else's fault except me. And Christ says, that's actually not my fault, but I'll take the blame.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll do the opposite of that.
Yeah.
I'll go completely reverse. And so this is why there is a relationship between there could be a relationship between the idea of the worm and Christ, is because Christ becomes the serpent in that case.
Yes.
But in the story of Jonah, you really have to see it, that it's really hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, it's so funny. Everything about Jonah is a joke. Like
the cattle repent.
Like, and also, like, think about it. Like, Jonah doesn't want the city to repent, and then when the city repents, he's angry. Yeah. And then he goes out into the Garden of Eden, and then he's annoyed because he's put into the presence of God. It's like all of a sudden he's in the actual presence of God. The sun is the direct light from heaven, and the spirit. When you say wind in Scripture, it's just spirit, right? Yeah, it's the spirit. And then he's just like complaining the whole time as he's entering into like the divine presence ultimately. Yeah. So it's really funny. Like, you have to see it that way. But it does reveal in the secret kind of what Christ will do, because he'll take that same trip. Yeah.
And another thing to kind of reinforce the relationship between the worm and Jesus is, I don't remember the exact passage. I think it's like Job 32:18 or something like that. I don't know. But it says something along the lines of, man, what is man but rottenness, and the son of man but a worm? And it's like the son of man is Jesus. Yeah. And think about, what do worms do? They eat rottenness, they integrate it into their body, and then they transform it into fertile soil. And that's exactly what Jesus did. And I mean, when we take the term son of man, it's obviously a high priestly name that we see in like Daniel and Ezekiel, specifically referring to the high priestly role of Jesus. And the whole job of the high priests in the Old Testament, Leviticus 10:17, was to eat the sin offering, integrate it into their flesh, so that they may bear atonement for the congregation before the Lord. So it's like, the worm who eats rottenness is the Son of Man, is Jesus. He consumes us, and that's why we have the image in Revelation of Jesus spitting out the lukewarm church, because like we are integrated into God through eating. It's the marriage feast of Zion, right? It's all about eating, and that's why the first interaction between God and man communing was supposed to be eating of the tree in the Garden of Eden. So, yeah.
Jesus I mean, it is definitely interesting, but you have to be careful. Like, you have to be careful, because the worm, how can I say it? It's like, most of the time, the symbolism of a worm is not good, and most of the time, the symbolism of the serpent is also not good. In Scripture, it's mostly a negative symbol, but of course, Christ unites all these things in him, and he's able to transform sin into glory and death into glory. But sin is still bad, and going into the earth and being eaten by a worm is still not good. Like, it's a not good thing. But you're right. I think that your perception of how symbolism has multiple aspects to it, and you see that especially in how Christ kind of does. He kind of flips everything. Yeah. But yeah. Right.
Okay. I think with that, we can finish this conversation.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Hope you enjoyed it.
This was wonderful.
Yeah. Pleasure.
Well, it's gonna be. Do you have an audio version, or is it just video of the podcast?
We have.
Because the audio version is gonna be weird because of the birds.